The warning siren screamed across New Geneva Station as the first wave of Valdran warships tore through the defense perimeter. Commander Sarah Chen watched from the command deck as her fleet's outer line simply vanished from the tactical display. 12 battleships gone in under a minute. The enemy had brought more firepower than anyone had predicted. "All ships fall back to defensive formation Delta," she ordered, her voice steady despite the chaos erupting around her. "We need to buy the inner colonies time to evacuate." But there would be no time. The Valdran consensus had planned this invasion for years, and they executed it with brutal efficiency. 7 alien species, united under one banner, had decided that humanity's expansion into their region of space had gone far enough. They came not to negotiate, but to conquer. The war lasted 47 days. Historians would later call it the shortest war, though for those who lived through it, each day felt like an eternity. The outer colonies fell first. Proxima Centauri, Alpha Centauri, Tau Ceti, human settlements that had taken decades to build, were reduced to occupied territories in a matter of weeks. The Valdran moved with coordinated precision, their fleets overwhelming every defense humanity could muster. Admiral James Okoro commanded the Sole Defense Fleet, humanity's last and greatest military force. 200 warships, the pride of Earth's naval tradition, stood between the Valdran and the homeworld. They made their stand at the Kuiper Belt, among the ice and rock at the edge of the solar system. The battle lasted 6 hours. When it ended, only 17 human ships remained, and they were retreating at maximum speed toward Earth. Admiral Okoro sent his final transmission from the bridge of the UES Defiant as enemy fire tore through his ship's hull. "Tell Earth we bought them 3 days. Make them count." The transmission cut to static as the Defiant exploded in a brilliant flash of light. Those 3 days became a desperate scramble. Earth's orbital defense platforms, designed to repel asteroids and debris, were hastily retrofitted with military weapons. Ground-based missile batteries aimed their payloads at the sky. Every ship that could fly, every weapon that could fire, was prepared for the inevitable assault. The Valdran fleet arrived on the 45th day of the war. Their ships blotted out the stars, hundreds of vessels arranged in perfect formation. They broadcast a simple message in a dozen human languages. "Surrender now and your species will be allowed to exist under our governance. Resist and face extinction." President Maria Santos stood in the emergency bunker beneath Geneva, surrounded by the remnants of Earth's government. She was 63 years old and had never imagined she would be the one to make this choice. Around the room, generals and ministers argued over options that didn't exist: fight and die, or surrender and live as subjects of an alien empire. "Madam President," said General Wei Lin, his uniform still bearing scorch marks from an attack on the military headquarters, "we have one option they don't know about." "Project Exodus is not ready," Santos interrupted. "And even if it were, we need time. Time we don't have unless we give them what they want." The room fell silent. Everyone understood what she meant. On the 47th day, President Santos appeared on every screen, every broadcast, every communication channel on Earth and throughout the solar system. Her face was calm, though those who knew her could see the weight of her decision in her eyes. "People of Earth, people of humanity, wherever you may be," she began. "Today, I am authorized by the United Earth Government to announce our unconditional surrender to the Valdran Consensus. Effective immediately, all human military forces will cease combat operations and await instructions from Valdran Command. This decision was not made lightly, but it is made to preserve human life and give our species a future." She paused, and for just a moment, something flickered across her face, something that might have been hope or perhaps defiance. To every human listening to this broadcast, remember that we are not defined by our defeats, but by what we do after them. Survive, endure, remember. The transmission ended. Across Earth, people wept. In orbit, the last defenders powered down their weapons. The war was over. The Valdran held their victory ceremony on the steps of the United Nations building in New York. Their commander, a towering creature called Krell Vor, addressed the assembled crowd with a translator device rendering his words into English. "Your resistance was admirable but futile," he announced. "Humanity fought for 47 days against forces beyond your comprehension. You are now subjects of the Valdran Consensus. Accept this new reality, and you will find us to be fair rulers." The cameras broadcast his speech across the planet and throughout Valdran space. In their capital world, billions celebrated the swift victory. Humanity, the aggressive newcomers who had been pushing into consensus territory, had been put in their place with minimal Valdren casualties. What the Valdren did not broadcast, what their intelligence services noted but their commanders dismissed, was a curious detail in their post-war analysis. In the days leading up to Earth's surrender, hundreds of human ships had been detected leaving the solar system, not fleeing toward other human colonies but heading out into deep space, into the vast darkness between the stars. When questioned, human prisoners claimed they were evacuation vessels, civilian transports carrying refugees to distant safe zones. The Valdren accepted this explanation. After all, they had won. What did it matter where some frightened civilians had fled? In a secure bunker deep beneath Geneva, President Santos watched the victory ceremony with an expression that revealed nothing. Beside her, General Wei Lin asked quietly, "Do you think they suspect?" Santos shook her head slowly. "They think they've won. That's exactly what we need them to think. And the Exodus fleet is exactly where it needs to be," Santos replied. "Now we wait. However long it takes, we wait." 6 months had passed since the Valdren victory, and Commander Krelvor found himself surprisingly pleased with the occupation. The humans had proven to be docile subjects, far more cooperative than he had anticipated. Where he had expected insurgencies and sabotage, he found only quiet compliance. His morning briefing took place in what had once been the United Nations Security Council chamber. Now it served as the Valdren Administrative Center for Earth. 3 of his junior officers stood before him, reporting on the night's activities. "Any incidents?" Krelvor asked, reviewing data on his tablet. "None, Commander," replied Officer Then, a mantis-like creature from the Consensus's 4th member species. "The humans continue to meet their production quotas. Several manufacturing facilities have even exceeded expectations." Krelvor's mandibles clicked together in satisfaction. "And the resistance cells we were warned about? We found no evidence of organized resistance anywhere on the planet," Then reported. "There are isolated incidents of non-compliance, individuals refusing to work but nothing coordinated. It appears humanity accepted defeat more completely than our intelligence predicted." Something about that bothered Krelvor, though he couldn't articulate why. In his 20 years of military service, he had overseen 3 occupations. This was by far the easiest, and that fact made him uneasy. Across the Pacific Ocean, in what remained of Tokyo, human worker Kenji Yamamoto assembled circuit boards in a Valdren-operated factory. His hands moved with practiced efficiency, connecting components with mechanical precision. To any observer, he was simply another compliant worker, doing his job under alien occupation. But Kenji was counting. He counted every circuit board, every component, every shift. He counted the number of Valdren guards and their rotation schedules. He counted the seconds between patrol passes. He had been counting for 6 months, and he would continue counting until the signal came. Around the world, thousands like Kenji were counting, watching, and waiting. In the deeper reaches of space far beyond Earth's occupied territory, the Valdren were encountering their first problems. 3 scout ships had failed to report back from routine patrol missions. 2 mining operations on distant asteroids had gone silent. These were minor incidents in an empire spanning hundreds of systems, but they formed a pattern that troubled Intelligence Officer Mira Ven. She stood before the Consensus High Council, projecting her findings on a holographic display. "Honored Council members, I believe these disappearances warrant investigation. All incidents occurred in the same sector, an area of space that borders what was formerly the human expansion zone." Council Speaker Vorn Kal, a massive creature resembling an armored bear, dismissed her concern with a wave of his claw. "Scout ships malfunction. Mining crews abandon unprofitable sites. You see patterns in randomness, Officer Mira Ven?" "With respect, Speaker, I have interrogated several human prisoners about communications we intercepted before the surrender. They referenced something called the Exodus fleet and mentioned contingencies. When pressed for details, the humans are defeated," Vorn Kal interrupted. "Their Exodus fleet, if it existed, was likely civilian evacuation ships. They pose no threat to the Consensus. Focus your efforts on actual security concerns, not phantom fleets." Mira Ven bowed her head in submission, but doubt gnawed at her. She had spent years studying human military doctrine and history. Humans had a saying, "If you're not cheating, you're not trying." They were a species that valued deception as a valid military tactic. Could a species like that truly surrender so completely? The answer came 3 weeks later, in a report that chilled her to her core. The science vessel Zealous Inquiry had been investigating a dark nebula 17 light-years from human space. They had detected unusual metal concentrations far too regular to be natural formations. The ship's final transmission was garbled and frantic. Structures. Enormous structures. They're everywhere in the nebula. Oh stars, they're not abandoned. There are lights. Something's moving. It's massive. The transmission ended in static. 5 days later, a single escape pod was recovered by a passing freighter. Inside was the Zealous Inquiry's junior xenobiologist, a young Valdrin named Priltak. He was found curled in a corner of the pod, rocking back and forth, his eyes wide with terror. The medical team at the nearest Valdrin station tried to treat him for physical injuries, but his body was unharmed. His mind, however, was shattered. Giants in the dark, he whispered over and over. Ships the size of moons. They were building. They're still building. So many of them. Watching us with dead eyes. Waiting. The doctors diagnosed him with severe psychological trauma, possibly caused by isolation or a malfunction in the pod's life support. Space madness, they called it. His testimony was filed away and largely forgotten by everyone except Intelligence Officer Mira Venn. She requested permission to investigate the nebula herself. The request was denied. Resources could not be spared for what the High Council deemed a wild chase based on the ravings of a traumatized individual. On Earth, President Santos received a coded message through channels so secret that even the Valdrin monitoring every communication on the planet couldn't detect it. The message was simple: foundation complete. Construction at 47%. Estimate 18 months to full operational capacity. She burned the message immediately after reading it, as protocol demanded. 47%. Almost halfway there. She had hoped for faster progress, but the engineers had warned her that building ships of that size, with that level of sophistication, could not be rushed. 18 more months of occupation. 18 months of humanity bowing its head to alien masters. Could they maintain the deception that long? More importantly, could the occupied population endure it? She had her answer that evening when a young Valdrin officer struck a human child for walking too slowly on the street. The child's father, a former soldier, had taken 2 steps toward the alien before others pulled him back. The man's eyes held murder, but he allowed himself to be restrained. Santos watched the security footage with a heavy heart. Her people were reaching their breaking point. The pressure built every day like steam in a sealed container. Eventually something would explode, and when it did, it could jeopardize everything. She activated a secure communication channel used only for the most critical messages. "This is Santos. Accelerate the timeline if possible. We're running out of time down here." The response came 3 hours later. "Understood. Pushing construction crews to maximum capacity. Estimate revised to 14 months. Hold position. We're coming home. 14 months. Santos closed her eyes and did the calculation. 420 days. She had asked her people to endure the impossible, to surrender their pride and freedom for a plan that most of them didn't even know existed. In orbit above Earth, Commander Krelvor reviewed the same security footage of the incident with the child. He saw the father's rage, saw how close the man had come to attacking. He saw the others pull him back, preventing an incident. "They're not as compliant as they appear," he said to his second-in-command. "They're controlling themselves. Disciplining themselves. That takes organization." His second-in-command clicked his mandibles dismissively. "Perhaps they simply fear punishment." "Perhaps," Krelvor agreed. But he didn't believe it. Humans who feared would cower or flee. These humans were doing something else. They were waiting. 53 years before the Valdrin invasion, a group of military strategists and scientists gathered in a secret facility beneath the mountains of Colorado. They had been summoned by Admiral Catherine Zhao, then the youngest admiral in Earth's naval history, to discuss a problem that most humans refuse to acknowledge. "War with the Valdrin consensus is inevitable," Admiral Zhao stated, her words echoing in the underground chamber. "Our expansion into their territory threatens their sphere of influence. They have superior numbers, more advanced FTL drives, and control of strategic resources we need. In a conventional war, we lose. The question is not if we fight them, but how. Dr. Robert Singh, a physicist specializing in industrial automation, leaned forward in his chair. "You're asking us to find a way to win a war we can't win?" "No," Zhao replied. "I'm asking you to find a way to win the second war. Because the first one we're going to lose on purpose." The room erupted in protests. Lose on purpose? Surrender Earth itself? The idea was insane. But Admiral Zhao let them argue, let them vent their disbelief and anger. When they finally quieted, she continued. "The Valdren think in terms of conventional military doctrine. Fleet engagements, occupied territories, surrender terms. They've conquered 4 species before us using the same playbook. We're going to let them think they've conquered us too, and while they celebrate their victory, we're going to prepare for a war they won't see coming." She activated a holographic display showing the vast emptiness between stars. Space is big, incomprehensibly big. There are regions of space so dark, so empty, that no one bothers to chart them. No resources worth exploiting, no strategic value, but that emptiness is exactly what we need. Over the following months, Admiral Zhao's team developed what they called Project Exodus. The plan was audacious to the point of madness. It required humanity to sacrifice its pride, its freedom, and possibly an entire generation of its people. But if it worked, it would ensure humanity's survival and deliver a defeat to the Valdren that they would never forget. The first phase began immediately. In secret shipyards hidden in asteroid fields and on remote moons, humanity built not weapons but construction ships. These vessels had one purpose: to travel to the darkest regions of space and begin building infrastructure. The second phase took decades. Automated mining drones programmed with advanced AI were sent to brown dwarf systems and rogue planets that drifted through interstellar space. These worlds had no value to anyone, but they had mass, iron, titanium, rare metals, everything needed to build ships. The drones didn't just mine. They replicated. 1 became 2, 2 became 4, 4 became 8. Within a decade, millions of drones harvested resources from dozens of lifeless systems, feeding materials to construction facilities that grew like crystalline structures in the void. Dr. Singh oversaw the shipyard construction. His genius lay not in designing new technologies, but in scaling up existing ones to unprecedented levels. The shipyards he created were each the size of a small moon, capable of constructing vessels far larger than any ship humanity had ever built. But the ships themselves required a new kind of thinking. That's where Dr. Yuki Tanaka came in. She was a 28-year-old engineer when she joined Project Exodus, and she asked the question that changed everything. Why are we building warships like we've always built them? Space combat doesn't need to follow naval tradition. Her revolutionary designs threw out centuries of military shipbuilding doctrine. No need for crew quarters when AI could handle most functions. No need for elegant lines or aerodynamics in space. No need to limit weapons to what a human crew could manage. What emerged from her designs were dreadnoughts, ships that barely resembled traditional vessels. They were 15 kilometers long, built around massive spinal railguns that could accelerate projectiles to 70% the speed of light. Their hulls were layers of armor 30 meters thick. They carried enough missiles to level a planet and point defense systems that could track and eliminate thousands of targets simultaneously. Each dreadnought required 5 years to build, even with the automated systems. The cost and resources was staggering, but they weren't building a few dreadnoughts. They were building 500. The third phase was perhaps the hardest, the human element. The Exodus fleet needed crews, but those crews would have to leave Earth, leave their families, and travel to the construction sites knowing they might never return. The journey alone took 3 years at maximum FTL speed. Among the first volunteers was Captain Helena Voss. She was 32 when she said goodbye to her family, telling them she had been selected for a long-term deep space research mission. In truth, she knew she was saying goodbye forever. The journey to the construction site, hidden in a nebula 17 light-years from Earth, was brutal. 3 years in cold sleep, awakening to find yourself in complete darkness, surrounded by partially constructed vessels so massive they seemed to defy physics. Voss and 20,000 others like her became the core of the Exodus fleet. They supervised construction, trained on the new vessels, and prepared for a war that might not come for decades. Many of them had families back on Earth, children who would grow up without parents, spouses who would grow old alone. This was their sacrifice. As construction continued, Earth prepared for its own sacrifice. The war with the Valdrin was coming, and humanity had to lose convincingly. Military academies taught their students real tactics, but they also taught them theater, how to fight hard enough to seem genuine, but not so effectively that they might actually win. Admiral James Okoro, who would later command the Sol Defense Fleet in its doomed last stand, knew exactly what his role was. His orders were clear: delay the Valdrin as long as possible, but ultimately fail. Make them believe they had defeated humanity's best. The day Okoro received those orders, he locked himself in his quarters and wept. He was being asked to lead thousands of loyal soldiers to their deaths in a battle they were meant to lose. But he understood the necessity. The Exodus fleet needed time. Every day he bought them was another day of construction, another week closer to completion. President Maria Santos was read into Project Exodus when she took office, 2 years before the Valdrin invasion. The briefing lasted 6 hours and left her shaken. She was being told that her presidency would end in surrender, that she would be remembered as the leader who gave Earth to its enemies. The Dreadnoughts will return, Admiral Zhao's successor told her, but it will take time, possibly years of occupation. Your job is to keep humanity alive and compliant during that time. Can you do that? Santos looked at the holographic images of the Dreadnoughts under construction, ships powerful enough to reshape the balance of power in the entire region of space. She thought about the children who would grow up under alien rule, the people who would suffer and die during the occupation. How long? She asked. Worst case? 2 years of occupation, Santos nodded slowly. Then we endure 2 years. Tell the fleet to come home when they're ready. We'll be waiting. Now 18 months into the occupation, the pieces were all in position. The Dreadnoughts were 93% complete. Their crews had trained for years and were ready. The shipyards in the darkness had served their purpose and would be abandoned once the fleet departed. In the void between stars, Admiral Helena Voss stood on the bridge of the UES Retribution, the first completed dreadnought. She was 62 years old now, her hair gray, her face lined with age. She had left Earth as a young woman and would return as an old one. Her children were grown, her grandchildren nearly adults. She had missed 3 decades of their lives, but as she looked out at the fleet assembled around her, 50 dreadnoughts completed. With hundreds more finishing in the yards, she knew it had been worth it. Navigator, she said quietly. Calculate jump coordinates for human space. All ships. Coordinates calculated, Admiral. Voss took a breath. 30 years of preparation. 18 months of watching her people suffer under occupation. It all came down to this moment. Execute jump in 36 hours, she ordered. We're going home. The Valdrin Border Patrol Station at Grid Sector 447 had the distinction of being the most boring posting in the entire consensus military. Nothing ever happened at the edge of former human space. The war was over, the occupation proceeding smoothly, and the patrol crews spent their shifts playing games and counting down to their rotation home. Sensor operator Kelvir was dozing at his station when the alarm started screaming. He jolted awake, convinced it was a malfunction. The sensors had to be wrong. They had to be. Sir, he called to his commander. I'm reading multiple gravitational anomalies. Massive ones. Approaching from deep space. Commander Trevnall rushed to the sensor station, his 4 eyes scanning the data. How many? I'm counting. 53 distinct signatures, sir. No, wait, more are appearing. 70, 90. They're still coming. Size? Kelvir's hands trembled as he refined the readings. Each signature is, this can't be right. Each one is larger than our biggest battle carrier. Much larger. Trevnall felt his blood turn cold. Send an emergency transmission to High Command. Maximum priority. And somebody get me visual confirmation. The visual feeds came through 2 minutes later. What they showed made every being on the station fall silent. Ships. Enormous ships, each one dwarfing anything in the Valdrin arsenal. They moved in perfect formation, dozens of them, with more emerging from FTL with each passing second. One ship broke formation and approached the patrol station. It was 15 kilometers long, its hull a dark gray metal that seemed to absorb light. Weapons bristled from every surface, massive railgun turrets, missile pods containing hundreds of warheads, and point defense systems that tracked the tiny patrol ships with precision. A transmission came through in clear Valdrin standard. Valdrin Patrol Station. This is Admiral Helena Voss of the United Earth Space Fleet. Occupation time is over. You have 24 hours to evacuate all Valdran forces from human-controlled space. Any forces remaining after that deadline will be removed. This is your only warning. Commander Trevnall stared at the image of the human admiral on his screen. She was old, her face weathered, but her eyes held the cold certainty of someone who had waited a very long time for this moment. This is Commander Trevnall of the Valdran Consensus. You are in violation of surrender terms. Power down your weapons and prepare to... The transmission cut off as the massive human ship fired a single shot. The railgun projectile, moving at 70% light speed, struck an abandoned asteroid 2,000 kilometers away. The asteroid simply ceased to exist, vaporized into plasma by the kinetic impact. Admiral Voss's face reappeared on screen. That was a demonstration. The next shot will not be. 24 hours, Commander. I suggest you start evacuating. The transmission ended. In the silence that followed, Kelvir whispered what they were all thinking. Where did they come from? On the Valdran capital world of Vorn, the High Council convened an emergency session. The intelligence reports streaming in were impossible yet undeniable. A human fleet had appeared from nowhere, consisting of vessels that shouldn't exist. We destroyed their shipyards. Council Speaker Vornkal roared. We destroyed their fleet. How did they build these ships? Intelligence Officer Mira Ven, who had been vindicated in her warnings but took no pleasure in it, presented her analysis. They didn't build them after the war, Speaker. They built them before, possibly decades before. The Exodus fleet we detected leaving Earth before the surrender, those weren't evacuation ships. They were crew transfers, impossible. Our scouts surveyed all of human space. There were no construction facilities of this scale. Because they weren't in human space, Miraven explained. They were in the void. The dark spaces between stars where no one looks because there's nothing there. Or so we thought. The science vessel we lost, it found their shipyards. That's why it never returned. Council member Threnval, who commanded the Consensus military forces, studied the tactical data. How many ships do they have? Current count is 173 Dreadnoughts, Miraven reported. That number may increase. We don't know how many they built. Then we crush them with numbers. We have 2,000 ships in the occupation fleet alone. 2,000 ships designed for occupation duties, Miraven countered. Look at the technical analysis. A single one of their dreadnoughts has more firepower than 10 of our battle carriers. Their point defense systems are perfect. Our analysts can't find any gaps. Their armor is 30 meters thick. And those railguns. She pulled up the footage of the destroyed asteroid. At that velocity, shields are irrelevant. If that projectile hits a ship, the ship is gone. You're suggesting we cannot win? I'm suggesting that engaging them would be catastrophic. But the decision is yours, Council. Vornkal slammed his massive paw on the table. We do not bow to defeated enemies. Order the occupation fleet to engage and destroy these human ships. Show them the might of the Consensus. The order went out. The Valdran occupation fleet, stationed throughout human space to maintain control, began mobilizing toward Proxima Centauri, where the largest concentration of human dreadnoughts had been detected. 2,000 Valdran warships, the pride of their navy, moved to intercept. Admiral Voss watched them come on her tactical display. She had known this would happen. The Valdran had conquered 4 species before humanity. They had never faced a real setback. Pride would drive them to attack, and pride would be their downfall. All ships battle formation Omega, she commanded. Weapons free on my order. 50 dreadnoughts arranged themselves in a globe formation around Proxima Centauri. The Valdran fleet approached in their standard attack formation. Expecting a conventional engagement, what they got was slaughter. The battle, later known as the Battle of Proxima, lasted 4 hours and 11 minutes. The Dreadnought's long-range railguns opened fire at a distance the Valdran considered impossibly far. Traveling at relativistic speeds, the projectiles gave no warning, no time to dodge. Ships simply exploded as hypersonic rounds tore through their hulls. The Valdran closed the distance, launching thousands of missiles and energy weapons. The human point defense systems activated. Every single incoming missile was intercepted and destroyed. Energy weapons splashed harmlessly against armor designed to withstand the heat of a star's corona. When the Valdran fleet entered medium range, the Dreadnoughts launched their own missiles. Each warhead carried a fusion payload powerful enough to crack a small moon. Valdran ships died in clusters torn apart by nuclear fire. The few Valdran vessels that survived to close range found no weakness to exploit. The Dreadnoughts' armor absorbed hits that would have disabled any other ship. Their computers calculated firing solutions faster than any organic crew. Their AI-assisted systems never tired, never made mistakes. 4 hours after it began, the Battle of Proxima was over. Of 2,000 Valdran ships, fewer than 100 escaped. The human fleet reported 0 casualties. Not a single dreadnought had been destroyed or even significantly damaged. On Earth, every human with access to a screen watched the battle through feeds that resistance cells had hacked into the Valdran communication networks. When the last Valdran ship retreated, cities erupted in celebration. People poured into the streets, crying, laughing, embracing strangers. President Santos stood at her window in the Geneva bunker and watched the celebrations below. Her personal communication device chimed with an incoming message from Admiral Voss. "Madam President, this is Admiral Voss. We have returned. Prepare for liberation." Santos closed her eyes, letting tears run down her face. 18 months of occupation. 18 months of watching her people suffer. And now finally it was almost over. She activated the emergency broadcast system, her face appearing on every screen on Earth. "People of Earth, this is President Santos. You've all seen what just happened at Proxima. The Exodus fleet has returned. The liberation of Earth begins now. To all resistance cells, this is activation code Omega-7. I repeat, Omega-7. It's time." Across the planet, thousands of humans who had spent 18 months playing the role of compliant workers stood up from their stations. Kenji Yamamoto in Tokyo, who had been counting for so long, finally stopped counting and started acting. He and his cell disabled the power to the factory, plunging the Valdran guards into darkness. In New York, in London, in Shanghai, in Moscow, in every city where Valdran forces were stationed, the resistance emerged from hiding. They sabotaged communication systems, blocked transportation routes, and generally made continuing the occupation impossible. The Valdran found themselves stranded on a planet that had suddenly turned hostile, cut off from support, with an overwhelming human fleet approaching from orbit. Commander Krell, still in his headquarters in New York, watched it all fall apart. He had been right. The humans had been waiting for this exact moment. His communication console lit up with a transmission request. He accepted it and Admiral Voss's face appeared on screen. "Commander Krell," she said, "it's over. Your fleet is destroyed. Your forces on Earth are surrounded. I'm giving you the same choice you gave us 18 months ago. Surrender now and your people will be allowed to leave. Resist and face the consequences." Krell looked at the tactical display showing the Dreadnoughts in orbit. He thought about the battle at Proxima, about the 2,000 ships that had been Annie. The liberation of human space took 17 days. Admiral Voss divided her fleet into battle groups, each led by 20 Dreadnoughts and supported by hundreds of smaller vessels that had been hidden throughout the occupation. They moved through the former human colonies like a storm, methodical and unstoppable. Alpha Centauri was liberated in 6 hours. The Valdran garrison, having learned what happened at Proxima, surrendered immediately upon the fleet's arrival. Tau Ceti took longer, not because the Valdran resisted, but because the human population needed time to organize after 18 months of occupation. News of Earth's liberation and the destruction of the occupation fleet spread through Valdran space like wildfire. The species that comprised the consensus began asking uncomfortable questions. How had the Valdran leadership allowed this to happen? How had they failed to detect the construction of such a massive fleet? And most importantly, what else might humanity have prepared? On the Valdran capital world, the High Council faced a crisis. 3 of the 7 member species were calling for withdrawal from the consensus entirely. Others demanded the resignation of the entire military leadership. But Council Speaker Vornkel remained defiant. "We sue for peace, but from a position of strength," he declared. "We still have fleets. We still have resources. The humans won a battle, but they cannot win a war against the entire consensus." Intelligence Officer Mira Venn, who had been promoted after her predictions proved accurate, stood before the council with new reports. "Speaker, I must advise against continued hostilities. Our analysts have revised their estimates of human capabilities." Explained. "The shipyards we found in the nebula, they're enormous, far larger than we initially believed, and they appear to be designed for continued production. The 173 dreadnoughts we've counted may only be the first wave. If the humans can build that many ships in secret over several decades, what else might they have prepared? Council member Threnval, his confidence shaken by the disaster at Proxima, added his voice. Our fleets are demoralized. Word has spread of the battle. Our ships are crewed by beings who now know they cannot win against these human vessels. If we continue the war, we risk mass desertions. Then we fight with those who remain loyal, Forncal roared. With what objective? Miraven asked quietly. We can no longer occupy human space. We cannot match their firepower. We cannot even determine where all their assets are located. The humans fought a 50-year war that we didn't know was happening, and they won. What's to stop them from doing it again? The question hung in the air, unanswered. On Earth, the final Valdrin transport ships lifted off from spaceports around the globe. Commander Krelvor was on the last one, watching the planet shrink below him. He had been an occupier for 18 months, and in that time he had learned to respect the species he'd been sent to subjugate. They had endured the occupation with patience that seemed inhuman. They had played their role perfectly, acting defeated while preparing their counterstroke. And when the moment came, they had struck with precision and overwhelming force. The humans hadn't just won militarily. They had won strategically, psychologically. Every species in the consensus now knew that humanity could not be conquered conventionally. The next time tensions rose, other species would remember the dreadnoughts appearing from the void, and they would hesitate. Admiral Voss arrived in Earth orbit 3 days after the last Valdrin ship departed. She hadn't been home in 30 years. The young captain who had left Earth for the shipyards was now an old woman, gray and weathered. But she had fulfilled her mission. A shuttle brought her down to Geneva, where President Santos waited. The two women met in the same bunker where Santos had broadcast Earth's surrender 18 months earlier. They stood looking at each other for a long moment. The president who had endured the occupation and the admiral who had prepared the liberation. Welcome home. Admiral, Santos said finally, it's good to be home. Madam President, the Council of Humanity wants to honor you and your fleet. Parades, medals, ceremonies, the works. Voss shook her head. The people who deserve honors are the ones who lived through the occupation. We were in space building ships. They were down here facing the enemy every day. They want to thank you regardless. The entire planet watched the Battle of Proxima. You're heroes to them. We were just following the plan. The real heroes were the people who created it. Voss paused. Admiral Zhao died 7 years ago. She never saw the dreadnoughts completed. Dr. Singh died in a construction accident 5 years ago. We lost hundreds of people building the fleet. They're the ones who should be remembered. Santos nodded slowly. We'll remember them all. But you should know what your return meant to us. During the occupation, there were times when people lost hope, when they couldn't see any path forward. The knowledge that the Exodus fleet was out there, preparing, building, coming back, that's what kept many people going. That evening, Admiral Voss walked through the streets of Geneva for the first time in 3 decades. The city had changed, scarred by occupation but already beginning to rebuild. People recognized her from the broadcasts, stopping to thank her, some crying, some just wanting to shake her hand. She met one woman, perhaps 40 years old, holding a young girl's hand. My father was on the Defiant, the woman said. Admiral Okoro's ship. He died at the Kuiper Belt buying you time. Voss felt her throat tighten. I'm sorry for your loss. Don't be sorry. He knew what he was doing. They all did. He left me a letter to be opened when I turned 18. He explained everything, the plan, the Exodus fleet, what his sacrifice was for. He made me promise to tell his granddaughter when she was old enough. The woman looked down at the little girl. Yesterday I told her that her great-grandfather helped save humanity. Voss knelt down to the child's level. Your great-grandfather was a hero. Don't ever forget that. The diplomatic negotiations with the Valdrin Consensus took 3 months. They met on a neutral station at the border of human space. Admiral Voss insisted on being present, along with President Santos and representatives from every liberated human colony. Council Speaker Vorncal led the Valdrin delegation. He was subdued, his earlier arrogance replaced by wary respect. The terms humanity presented were not gentle. Full withdrawal of all Valdrin forces from a 50-light-year buffer zone around human space. Reparations for damages caused during the occupation. Return of all human prisoners and confiscated property. And perhaps most significantly, The establishment of a permanent demilitarized zone monitored by human forces. These terms are harsh, Vorncal said. They're merciful, Santos replied. You invaded our space. You occupied our worlds. You killed thousands of our people. In return, we're letting you leave alive and we're not demanding territory. I'd call that generous. And if we refuse? Admiral Voss leaned forward. Then we resume operations. I have 300 dreadnoughts now. More are completing every month. I also have the locations of every major Valdran military installation, courtesy of intelligence we gathered during the occupation. I can be at your capital world in 3 days. Your choice. The Valdran signed the treaty. News of the settlement rippled through known space. Humanity, the newcomer species that had been dismissed as aggressive but weak, had defeated the mighty Valdran consensus. Other species began reaching out to Earth, seeking trade agreements and non-aggression pacts. Some sought alliances. Others simply wanted to ensure they never faced the fate the Valdran had. The balance of power in the entire region had shifted, and humanity now sat at the center of it. 6 months after the liberation, Admiral Voss stood at a memorial in New Geneva Station. The station had been destroyed during the first days of the war and rebuilt during the occupation. Now it served as a monument to those who had died. The memorial listed names, thousands of them, soldiers who fell in the initial defense, civilians killed during occupation, workers who died building the dreadnoughts in secret, all the people whose sacrifice had made liberation possible. A young aide approached her, a lieutenant fresh from the academy. Admiral, the council is asking about the fate of the shipyards. Now that the war is over, should we decommission them? Voss looked out at the stars, thinking about the Valdran, about the other species watching humanity with new wariness, about the countless threats that might emerge from the unknown. No, she said finally. Keep them operational. Keep building. Building what, Admiral? More dreadnoughts. The galaxy just learned that humanity cannot be conquered easily. I want to make sure they learn it's impossible. She turned to the young officer. You weren't alive during the occupation. You didn't see what it was like to have aliens control our worlds. I did, and I swore that humanity would never be in that position again. Some species are complaining that we're militarizing too heavily, that we're becoming a threat. Voss smiled grimly. Good, let them complain. Let them worry. The day we stop being a threat is the day we become a target. She looked back at the memorial, at all those names. We taught the galaxy a lesson that will echo for centuries. You don't defeat humanity by winning the first battle. Because we'll use that,